Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Grand Page. Before we get started on today's topic, I'd like to promote my Substack, the Grand Page. I write my fiction and poetry here. If you like this video, you might also like my writing. It's really easy to subscribe. You can get all of my writings through your email if you subscribe with your email, or if you have the Substack app, you can subscribe directly to me there and have access to all of my writing on the Substack app. Without further ado, let's get to our topic for today. I'm throwing my hat in the ring on this topic of Assassin's Creed Shadows because I've seen a lot of discourse around this, and I feel like I have a few things to say that I don't think a lot of other people have said yet. So, with that all being said, for anyone who is unaware of what's going on around Assassin's Creed Shadows, it's the next Assassin's Creed game. It's finally being set in Japan, which is something fans have been asking for years. And it's getting a lot of attention because of one of the main protagonists here in the picture, the protagonist of Yasuke. So we're going to be talking about the discussions around this, what I think is being forgotten or missed, and what I think the real problem is. So there's a couple reasons why Assassin's Creed Shadows is getting so much flack. A lot of people are going to claim that it's all just racism, and admittedly, yes, there's going to be some of that inevitably, okay? But I don't think that's the main thing. That's not the main talking point, or even if people don't know why they're bucking at this, it's not the main reason why people are bucking at this. Now, aside from the main character, everything about Assassin's Creed Shadows, from what I've seen, is absolutely Assassin's Creed. Previous Assassin's Creed games typically take a fictional character, someone who's made up, and then they will place that fictional character in the non-fictional world. They will place them in a real place, a real time period, during a real time of typically turmoil, especially. With Assassin's Creed 1, you had the Crusades, and in Ezio's case, with Assassin's Creed 2, you were in Italy, and you interacted with people like Leonardo da Vinci, actual real historical figures. Assassin's Creed 3, you were in the Revolutionary War. A consistent thing throughout the Assassin's Creed games has been that though you are placed in a real time during a real historical event, typically your protagonist was fictional. They were not real, just like the assassins aren't real, just like the Templars, at least acting nowadays, are not real. So those aspects of the story were always fictionalized, and it's the backdrop or the setting of the games that was historical. Not necessarily historically accurate, just historical. Now, with Assassin's Creed Shadows, they've changed this, and now you are playing an actual historical person. Yasuke was a real person, and they took this real person and they took the actual events around this real person and decided to make a game around it. Now, on the surface, there's nothing wrong with this. From what I've seen and what I've looked up, this is a very interesting time in Japanese history. There was civil war during this time period. The guy that Yasuke is in service to, Nobunaga, I think is his name. I could be butchering the pronunciation, but he is a real person in real life, and the events surrounding this individual and Yasuke were significant to Japanese history. So all of these things are typical Assassin's Creed game elements. These are things that have been included and have been a part of other Assassin's Creed games. So that is all thematically consistent. The story for Assassin's Creed Shadows and the historical relevance of it, all that is thematically consistent with previous Assassin's Creed games. What is not thematically consistent is our main protagonist. Usually our main protagonist is not an actual historical figure. Usually our main protagonist is someone who is fictional, someone who's working behind the scenes affecting history, because they are a part of an organization and they are a part of a conflict that was working behind the scenes. The idea is that the assassins and the Templars are these agents in the background of history affecting events. That was always the pull and the interest of these games, is that they affected history in the background. Because do you really know everything about history? None of us really do, because that's the unfortunate side effect of history itself. Only so much can be remembered, only so much can be passed on, only so much can be written down, and so a lot gets forgotten about or lost in the shadows, pun intended. So that's really the main bucking that is going on with a lot of people, is that we are taking a real life historical figure and actually playing as them, when that is not typically the case with an Assassin's Creed game. For this game, we're taking an actual historical figure and playing as him, which is admittedly a really cool idea, but it's not thematically consistent with the previous Assassin's Creed games. Now, most likely how this even happened in the first place is when, and this is all speculation, so this is the part where I'm just kind of throwing out ideas on how this happened in the first place. They were probably just at the drawing board and they were like, okay, people have been asking for a game based in Japan for years now. Let's finally give them what they want. What can we do? And someone looked at that time in history, noticed that Yasuke was a major part of history, or maybe they already knew about him because he's been in media before, so he's not completely unknown. And people said, hey, why don't we use this actual guy from history and put him in the game? Or better yet, why don't we just have people play as him? And they thought it was a cool idea. Cool ideas are what help spark interest and in their case, can help revive a series. Though the series continues to be monetarily successful, it's not... It's a very formulaic franchise, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to win any awards. I don't know if maybe Assassin's Creed 2, maybe Black Flag, really got people excited and really focused on Assassin's Creed. But Assassin's Creed has always been a very mid-tier series. It's never been like super big. It's been successful because of the basic ideas around it. But anyways, I digress. So thematically, it's not consistent as far as the protagonist and who we play as. And I don't think there was anything nefarious going on there. I think it's just they thought it was cool that this guy was real in history, and they were like, hey, why don't we change things up a little bit and make him one of the main characters for the game. And they greenlit it because it was a cool idea. Playing as a black guy in Japan, fine, let's do it. So I don't think there's anything nefarious going on there. I think the other inconsistency, though, is much more important. So while I don't think the changing of the protagonist is nearly as big of a deal, it does change up the consistency of the game franchise. But I think the bigger problem is the music. We've all seen that intro to the fighting mechanics of Assassin's Creed Shadows probably by now. And if you haven't, I recommend you go and check it out, because admittedly it's very jarring to hear modern day music or modern day inspiration, actually, is probably a better way of putting it. Modern day inspiration for music being put into the soundtrack of Assassin's Creed Shadows. And I think this is actually a much bigger problem than the protagonist thematic consistency, the thematic consistency of the music. When I heard about the weirdness going on with the Assassin's Creed Shadows music, and I went and actually saw the video for it, listened to the music. I bucked at it, but then I did something else. I went back to some of those old soundtracks. In particular, I went back to Assassin's Creed 3. I love Assassin's Creed 3. I still play it to this day. For me personally, it's still my favorite Assassin's Creed game. We might get into that here in a little bit, but I would even argue that Assassin's Creed 3 was a bit higher on the totem pole than most other Assassin's Creed games, even Black Flag. Yes, I did just say that. But I went back to those old soundtracks. And those old soundtracks were thematically consistent with the game that they were in. Not only were those previous games thematically consistent with its story and characters, but they were also thematically consistent with the music. The music fit what the game was about. And in Assassin's Creed Shadows, the music does not fit what the game is about. Why is there this thumping, bassy music in a game set in Japan? That is a much bigger issue going on with this game. And I think that is a fair criticism to level at all of this going on. So, it's that thematic inconsistency that most of the fan base is pointing out. The thematic inconsistency of one of the main characters, and then the thematic inconsistency of the music, that it does not match what we're playing. What we're listening to does not match what we're playing at all. Now, while those are problems in of themselves, I think there's an even bigger problem at play here that Ubisoft has to contend with. And that is, I would argue this game is 10 years too late. This game should have come out so long ago. And not even just because Assassin's Creed fans were asking for this a long time ago, but actually because of the games that have come out since or before this game was even announced. How can you possibly justify releasing this game when we have games like Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro that are going to be infinitely better than anything someone else is going to put out? I don't understand how they thought that it was a good idea to release this game even 4 years after Ghost of Tsushima and Sekiro. You might say, 4 years is a really long time. But my counter to that is, yes, Ghost of Tsushima came out 4 years ago, but it came out, and then the PS5 was released shortly after that, and then after the PS5 was released, the game got a director's cut, where it got a graphic increase to it. It got a graphic buff, and you were able to play the game in 60 frames per second, and they claim there's no loading screen. It is a loading screen. It's just a black screen that lasts 3 to 5 seconds, but that's essentially the no loading screen. But the game is near instant in terms of its fast travel, of jumping into the game, because of the power of the PS5, all of that. How can you possibly justify releasing a game like Assassin's Creed Shadows even 4 years after the release of Ghost of Tsushima, when that game is going to be abundantly better than what Ubisoft has to offer with Assassin's Creed Shadows? It just, marketing wise and getting everybody invested in something like this, it's not going to happen. You needed to either release this a long time ago or you need to wait a long time now, because Ghost of Tsushima is going to be relevant at least through the rest of the PS5 life cycle, if not even into the PS6, depending on if they do backwards compatibility there. We'll have to wait and see. I'd even argue that this game is irrelevant with a game like Sekiro. Now, yes, Sekiro doesn't boast free roaming like Ghost of Tsushima and Assassin's Creed will. However, it's still playing into that same element of being in Japan during a particular historical event. And, all of those thematic elements are still going to be there. It's not nearly the same kind of comparison that you could do with Ghost of Tsushima and Assassin's Creed Shadows, but it's still doing a lot of the same thematic stuff, inner turmoil during that period, and ninja / sword gameplay sort of thing. There's even stealth mechanics and very light parkour. How are you going to tell me that it's going to be more fun doing parkour when you got this guy who has an arm that can swing around trees and on buildings and stuff? It's just, especially since they've dumbed down the parkour in Assassin's Creed, unless they change it somehow in this game. I don't know. I don't see them beating Sekiro even, but especially I don't see them beating Ghost of Tsushima. They're not going to be able to do it better than them. This should have come out before these games, or it should have come out way, way, way after. 4 years after the fact ain't going to be enough time, because everyone's just going to say, oh, you should just get Ghost of Tsushima. It's $30 versus the $60 or $100 that Assassin's Creed Shadows is going to be. Everyone's just going to say, get Ghost of Tsushima. It's a better story. It's better gameplay. It's all these other things that it does. It's going to do infinitely better than Assassin's Creed will. It's just the inevitability of it. I don't think Ubisoft is going to be able to get past the fact that, what are you going to choose? A better game that's probably going to cost less, or a mediocre / mid-tier game that tries to do the things that Ghost of Tsushima just did better? You're not going to get past that. Now, bringing all these ideas up ultimately boils down to this one question: is how free should creative freedom be allowed? How free should creatives be allowed to be? And my answer ultimately is creatives should be as creative as they want to be. You should be free to release whatever you want to release. If you want to release something like Assassin's Creed, that's what you want to do after all of the previous experience of prior games, and then you want to change up that formula, you have that creative freedom. I'm not telling Ubisoft that they shouldn't make this game. Okay? Creative freedom, I think, is one of the most important freedoms that not just people should have, but a society should have. However, that does not make you free from criticism. And just like there should be creative criticism or creative freedom, there should also be critical freedom. Meaning, you can criticize a game for whatever. And ultimately, both with creative freedom and critical freedom, it is up to the audience to decide what is going to be acceptable in terms of making this game successful or taking criticisms seriously. That's what's going to be remembered, is what the audience decides to remember. And ultimately, even the audience is going to change positions on things. We've seen that with things like Star Wars, where when the prequels first came out, they were not well received. I was actually one of the weirdos that liked the prequels, including Phantom Menace and even Attack of the Clones. Um, People didn't like the prequels when they came out, but now all of a sudden those prequels are legitimate somehow. I don't know how that happened, but for whatever reason it did. But nonetheless, George Lucas was free to make those changes, those thematic changes to Star Wars. And he had every right to do so. And just like that, people also had the right to criticize those changes. And also, people have the right to look at things a little differently now. Ultimately, this comes to the idea of creative freedom. I'm not telling Ubisoft not to make this game. If that's what they want to make, that's what they want to make, and they shouldn't be stopped. But that doesn't keep the audience from noticing the obvious changes that they're making to this franchise, and the audience has a right to call them out on it. That is a valid criticism. When you change up the thematic consistency of a well-established franchise, people are going to notice, and you can either take those criticisms seriously, or you can just wave them away like they mean nothing. But just like the fans have a right to respond to whatever you're making, fans also have the right to respond to how you respond to them. All of that is valid. But ultimately, that's what it comes down to, is the ability to create freely. And whatever happens is what will happen, both to the game and to the fans. Because something else to keep in mind is, if fans really reject this game, I mean, this could be the last Assassin's Creed game. It probably won't be. But if this is how fans want to react whenever a game gets released and they act all crazy, then that might not entice Ubisoft to make more of them. They probably will, though. But also, if they act crazy like this, then they also run the risk of being delegitimized and not being taken seriously. Whenever you have a problem with something, you need to air it accurately and in a calm fashion, and not be outraged. The outrage, you're just going to look like a baby throwing a tantrum. That's all it's going to end up looking like. So, end of the day, I notice, and everyone else notices, the thematic inconsistencies with this Assassin's Creed game that's coming out, Assassin's Creed Shadows. Most people are noting the inconsistency of the protagonist, but I don't even think that's the real issue. I would argue that the real issue is the thematic inconsistency of the music. The music of previous games is far better than what we've gotten recently and what we're getting in this game. It's thematically inconsistent. It makes no sense to have that type of music in this time period whatsoever. It just makes no sense. I also argue that this game is 10 years too late, or they should have waited another 10 years, because there are vastly superior games that are doing the same thing this game is doing, that are going to be easier to get, and also not nearly as expensive, because holy crap, some of these additions for Assassin's Creed Shadows are absolutely atrocious. It makes no sense. But this all comes back to creative freedom. What creatives are allowed to do, I would argue that they're allowed to create whatever they want. But that does not free them from the criticism of their audience, especially an audience that's been established since 2010, 2008, whenever that first Assassin's Creed game came out. So we'll see how Assassin's Creed Shadows does. I'm sure monetarily it'll be very successful. I'm sure a lot of this controversy is going to actually ironically help it make more money. But again, that doesn't change the fact that thematically, this game has changed. This franchise has changed thematically with the introduction of an historical figure as its protagonist. And that's a big deal. Are they going to do that with future games? Are we trying to now bring this Templar and assassin fight to the forefront rather than the background? We'll have to wait and see whenever the game comes out. Remember, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing to my Substack, The Grand Page. As always, I am forever your most humble and obedient servant, The Page Ghost.